Hey, what's up, people? Welcome to my review and in-depth analysis of Clone Wars Volume 1 In Defense of Kamino, a comic series, or a collection rather, that was initially released by Dark Horse Comics. And I have to say that I absolutely love this series. When I think of the Clone Wars, I think of this comic series. Now, I really like the TV shows, the micro series from the Multimedia Project, and I really like the CGI cartoon of the Clone Wars. But if I had to pick, I would totally pick this comic series as far as recommending the best version of the Clone Wars. Now, I know it's probably all EU Legends canon, it fits together for more or less, but my point is, I absolutely love this comic series, and if you haven't read this series and you're a fan of the TV shows, you owe it to yourself to read this series. Now, one of the best things about this series is that it's really geared toward mature audiences, right? There's no silly droid humor like in the TV show. It's very serious here. We get some really serious subject matter, and I really appreciate that. And I think this series is just outstanding. For the most part, the artwork is outstanding. And what I really love about this is that we could totally see the inspirations for the TV shows that came from this, right? Like Ayla Secura, she was initially first introduced in this comic series, and George Lucas decided to bring her into the movies, decided to bring her into the TV shows, so that's great. And then also some of the characters in the micro series, like Dirge, we see where he came from here. We see how Anakin got the scar on his face in this series. So yeah, I really recommend this series. And Volume 1 is outstanding. In Defense of Kamino, we get a lot of excellent action, and we get introduced to Asajj Ventress. So let's get started with this review and in-depth analysis of Clone Wars Volume 1 In Defense of Kamino. Now, this volume opens up 1 month after the Battle of Geonosis, and we are introduced to this space station that is being called the Wheel Space Station. And here it is basically laid out that a character named Kayleen must die, right? And basically this character Kayleen is being hunted because Kayleen took something, right? So we don't know initially who's hunting him, so we're just hitting the ground running and being thrown into this story. So there's a character named Kayleen who's being hunted because this person stole something. Now, on Coruscant, the Jedi discuss their reluctance in regards to being generals in this war, the Clone Wars. However, they conclude that there is no choice, right? This is the only choice that they have available to them, even though it is contradicting the whole we are peacekeepers and we're passive position that the Jedis supposedly subscribe to, right? And another thing that has to be laid down here is that the character, the Jedi, Quinlan Vos, is missing. Now, Ayla Secura, who is Quinlan Vos's Padawan or former Padawan, is assigned to locate Quinlan Vos. Now, the notion that Quinlan may be using a different name is also introduced, and in fact, he is. So, he is using the name Corto Vos, right? Now, ultimately, Ayla Secura, and I just have to say, I love the character of Ayla Secura in the comic books. She didn't really get much shine in the films, you know, just kind of cameos. Oh, she's there in the background and stuff. She got a little bit of shine in the TV shows, right? There was like maybe 2 episodes where in the 3D CGI Clone Wars series where she actually, had dialogue and played an active role. She had a little cameo in the micro series, but in the comics, she's front and center, and she's a great character. She's fleshed out, and I absolutely love her. But anyway, Ayla Secura ultimately finds Quinlan Vos, and Quinlan he basically conveys to her that he feels like he is a failure, right? He's been in the field for 2 years, and he still doesn't know much about Count Dooku's plan. Now, an important detail is basically discussed in this scene, and basically 200 Jedi died at the Battle of Geonosis. So we're given a figure, and that's quite a lot, right? I mean, that's a lot of Jedi to go down in one battle. So, and I think Quinlan Vos is kind of upset about this, right? And if you know anything about this character, Quinlan Vos, you know that he struggles with the dark side, right? He walks that fine line between the dark side and the light side, because he's essentially going to act like a mole or a double agent with Count Dooku and the Separatists and the Sith, right? So Kayleen, the character that's being hunted, it turns out that Kayleen works for Quinlan Vos. And what this character stole was a message from Newt Gunray, leader of the Trade Federation. And this message is basically about the Separatist plan to attack the planet of Kamino, which is where the clones are created. Where now Quinlan Vos wants the disc, which is basically what Kayleen stole that has the information. He wants the disc returned to the character Xenix, who is basically the one that was hunting her, him and his goons, right? Now, the reason why Vos wants the disc returned to Xenix is so that they don't know that the Republic is aware of the Separatists' plan. Now, Kayleen may have to be sacrificed, right? And she volunteers, right? So this character, Kayleen, has no problem being a hero, no problem fighting against the Sith and fighting against the Separatists, right? And I like this character. Now, she volunteers, and Xenix basically sends this Faline henchman or kind of like thug, goon, whatever, to meet with Kayleen, right? And this Faline, and a Faline is that kind of like reptilian humanoid looking character. You've seen him in the Clone Wars. Darth Maul or Asajj Ventress rather decapitated a whole bunch of them with the double-bladed lightsaber. If you guys are familiar with the novel, the video game, and the comic Shadows of the Empire, Prince Xezier was a Faline. Now, this Faline that's sent by Xenix uses his pheromones to try to make her commit suicide. So that's one thing about these Faline characters. They're able to emit pheromones and basically use the power of suggestion to have characters do things against their will. And in this situation, this Faline is trying to get Kayleen to kill herself, right? But Aayla Secura and Quinlan Vos are able to rescue her and save the disc. Now, Quinlan Vos uses his force suggestion powers in order to get the Faline to tell Xenix that everything went as planned, right? That Kayleen is basically dead and that they recovered the disc. Now, there's a little detail here that I thought was interesting, and that is that Aayla Secura knows that the character Kayleen is basically in love with Quinlan Vos, right? And Quinlan accepts this. I'm pretty sure he's aware of this. And there's this kind of ethical question, right? As to whether it's right for him to use her to fulfill tasks on his behalf. Is he just using her? Is he basically, in other words, just manipulating her feelings and taking advantage of her feelings for selfish purposes, right? But it's left up in the air. Now, this section, or this first little collection of stories in this volume, ends with Dooku and Darth Sidious basically knowing everything, right? They already know what Quinlan Vos and Aayla Secura were trying to do, trying to make it seem like the Republic is not aware that the attack by the Separatists is going to be initiated on Kamino. They already know, right? And basically, they they want to use the cloning facility after the war for their own purposes. And I mean, if you think about it, how is Darth Sidious not going to know? He's also Palpatine. He knows what's going on both sides. He's the master manipulator, right? Now, after this portion of the volume is finished, we get to another section or another collection of stories which involves Anakin. So basically, Anakin Skywalker has a very bad vision about the Battle of Kamino, right? And Kenobi warns him about visions, not to trust them, that just because you have a vision doesn't necessarily mean that what you envision is going to come true. And Kenobi, he is the one that is going to lead the defense of Kamino. Now, initially, Anakin was not to take part of the defense of Kamino because Obi-Wan Kenobi senses that he is troubled. And what Obi-Wan Kenobi is actually sensing is Anakin being troubled by the death of his mother and the murder of the Sand People, which Anakin did in retaliation, right? And a rift definitely exists between Anakin and Obi-Wan since Geonosis. So that's basically laid out front and center in this portion of the comic. Now, Obi-Wan Kenobi also reiterates that I never chose him, right? And he says this to Quinlan Vos, and then Quinlan Vos tells him, maybe it's time that you did. I love that exchange. That is such a great, powerful moment right there, right? Excellent writing. And I love how Obi-Wan Kenobi just basically admits, like, I did not choose him. I did this on behalf of my dying master, Qui-Gon Jinn, right? And it totally brings everything into perspective, man. Even though the prequels, they're flawed, but there's some great stuff there as far as story. I mean, there's a great narrative there, right? I mean, you see right away why Anakin fell, right? I mean, just little by little. I mean, people say that in Revenge of the Sith, Anakin's turn was too sudden, but I disagree, right? I mean, it all started with the Jedi rejecting Anakin at 9 years old. They don't want nothing to do with him, right? He's too old. Get him out of here. Then they reluctantly accept him. Then the one that actually trains him didn't even really want to train him. He just did it because his master asked him to before he died. So it's like right from the very beginning, when Anakin came to the Jedi, and Anakin dreamed of becoming a Jedi, remember? Right from the very beginning, he saw that the Jedi didn't want him. The Jedi didn't accept him. The Jedi always kind of like looked down on him, right? And I really feel for Anakin, man. You know what I mean? Because he was an innocent kid, and the Jedi were pompous assholes, right? And just little by little, and then Anakin has all this power, and he couldn't save his mom, right? Because he had to subscribe to the Jedi teachings, which is no attachment. The duties of the Jedi come first, but he knows that he has the power to save his mother. Maybe not bring her back to life or prevent her from dying, but he could have kicked the Sand People's asses. He could have gone back and rescued her and all that stuff, but all that's forbidden. So it's like Anakin's turn was not sudden, right? And coming back to what's said in this comic, I really love this, man. I never chose him. And then Quinlan Vos says, maybe it's time you did. And then right after that exchange, Obi-Wan Kenobi changes his mind, and he decides Anakin to assist him in the defense of El Camino or Kamino, because Anakin is the best pilot, right? And then after this portion of the story, the battle begins, right? Again, I just love that exchange. And some people think that Obi-Wan Kenobi not choosing Anakin is a contradiction to the original trilogy. Maybe it is, but what George Lucas created is deep. I love it, right? The Duel of Fates, right? If Qui-Gon Jinn had won that battle against Darth Maul, Darth Vader may have never come into existence, right? Because he would have been the proper teacher for Anakin, right? And I think there's just a lot of nuance here that doesn't get credit. They don't give credit. A lot of the critics don't give George Lucas enough credit. And to me, I don't look at it as a contradiction with the original trilogy. To me, it's more of a deconstruction, right? Obi-Wan Kenobi, he's old. He's thinking fondly of his former Padawan, of his friend. He says, I took it upon myself to train Anakin. I mean, and that's not necessarily a continuity error. He did take it upon himself, right? But it was on behalf of his dying master, right? So anyway, I love this stuff. So moving on to the next portion, we see that this battle, the defense of Kamino, is a difficult battle, right? And we see Shaak Ti and Lama Su deliberate on utilizing the ARC troopers who were personally trained by Jango Fett, right? And it's great to see Shaak Ti. I love that character. She was absolutely badass in the Clone Wars micro series. And basically, the ARC troopers have been in stasis. And I guess the ultimate goal for this defense of Kamino is to protect the latest generation of clones. Now, Shaak Ti, Anakin, and Obi-Wan Kenobi and an ARC trooper, basically, they kind of argue amongst themselves, right? And the thing here is that what makes the utilization of these ARC troopers so questionable is that these ARC troopers are more independent thinking than the regular troopers. And on top of that, they were trained by Jango Fett personally, right? So they have these leadership qualities. They have an independence that the other clones don't necessarily have, right? And the ARC trooper openly criticizes the Jedi, specifically Anakin. And the ARC trooper attempts to use a self-destruct mechanism in order to destroy the clones. And his reasoning for this is that it's better to destroy the clones than to give them to the enemy. But the Jedi are able to use the Force to overcome the Separatist attack. And again, I thought the dynamic here between the characters was fascinating. It's super interesting the way that this comic series gets into the mind of characters that were kind of glossed over in the films, such as the clones, such as the other Jedi, and it's great. Absolutely love this, right? And just seeing that the ARC troopers are more independent than the regular troopers, it's a detail that's very fascinating to me. Now, after this portion of the story, there's a little section. Maybe if this was not a collected volume, maybe it would just be a one-shot of one comic issue. I thought it was kind of weak, right? I don't think it was absolutely horrible or dreadful or cringeworthy or anything like that, but it was skippable, right? And it involves this calamari conspiracy with the Separatists to win Kamino and basically shut down the clone facilities. And basically, at the end of the day, the calamari are given false intel by the Republic, and this leads to there being no power source underwater, and that's as far as it goes, honestly. This issue, or this one shot, didn't involve any legacy characters. There was no Obi-Wan Kenobi. There was no Anakin. There wasn't even popular characters from the comics. No Ayla Secura, no Quinlan Voss. It was literally just the calamari characters. And again, I read this and I was like, why is this here? Why is this part of this volume? I guess they needed some filler in order to pad it out and make it the necessary number of pages to call it a trade paperback, but this was totally skippable. Now, fortunately, the remaining portion of this collected volume is outstanding, right? So I'm not going to knock down this my grade too much because of this skippable story involving the calamari, because the next section was awesome. And it involves Mace Windu, right? And Mace Windu definitely gets his shine in this comic. So this story begins with Mace Windu attending Master Vuktu's funeral. Now, it's an important thing to note that during this funeral, some of the Jedi refuse to be generals, right? So that's one topic of conversation that is basically being undertaken during this funeral. And I thought that was interesting, right? Because we don't really get a sense of that from watching the movies or even necessarily the Clone Wars. So just to be given that information that some of the Jedi refuse to be generals is very interesting, right? And the reason for this is because they do not think that the Jedi should be participating on the front lines as generals in this war. The Jedi should be peacekeepers, right? And I'm kind of reminded of what's it called? Luminara Unduli's apprentice. I think Barriss Offee. I think that's her name, right? How she was against the war because the Jedi shouldn't be partaking in such a violent thing, shouldn't be generals, shouldn't be leading in the front lines, and she eventually ends up betraying the Jedi Order, as we saw at the end of Season 5 of the Clone Wars. So, anyway, Quinlan Vos makes contact with the leaders of some Jedi that have gone rogue. So, they're being addressed as dissident Jedi, right? And these Jedi that refuse to be generals, that basically kind of want to break away from the Jedi Order, right? They want to meet, they want to negotiate, they want to have an open discussion. And so do the Jedi, such as Mace Windu and Yoda, because they want to prevent a schism from arising in the Jedi Order. They don't want more Count Dooku's, in other words, right? Now, an interesting thing to note is that they specifically want to speak to Mace Windu only, right? So Mace Windu has to be the one to meet with these dissident Jedi. Now, there is a scene in this comic where Mace Windu is basically sparring with Quinlan Vos. And Quinlan uses a dark side technique during this sparring session. They're sparring with their lightsabers. And Mace Windu warns him not to use this technique so freely, in other words, right? It's something that should only be done sparingly, right? And Mace Windu, he has this technique where he kind of walks that fine line between the light side and the dark side. And I think what he's trying to convey to Quinlan Vos is that he's not ready. He's not disciplined enough to use this technique. Thought it was an interesting scene. Now, Count Dooku is aware of this meeting, and he basically sends Asajj Ventress to stop this meeting from happening. And he says that Mace Windu is responsible for abandoning Asajj Ventress's master when she was a Jedi. Thought that was an extremely interesting detail, one that I was unaware of until I read this comic, right? Now, I'm aware that Asajj Ventress used to be a Padawan, right, in the Jedi until her master was killed. We've seen this in other comics, and we've seen this in the Clone Wars TV show. So, knowing that Mace Windu was responsible for abandoning her master was very interesting, and of course, this is going to be used as fuel for the dark side, fuel for Asajj Ventress to aggressively attack Mace Windu and just cause nothing but trouble for the Jedi, right? Now, Master Bulk's Padawans all died in Geonosis, and this is another interesting thing, right? It just makes me think how severe the Battle of Geonosis was for the Jedi, right? Because even though the execution, in my opinion, the execution in Attack of the Clones wasn't my favorite as far as aesthetic, and even though we did see a bunch of Jedi laid out on that battlefield within the Geonosis arena. I never really got a sense of the loss. I mean, sure, we heard Anakin tell Dooku, "You're gonna pay for all the Jedi that you killed today," and things like that. But I never really felt much emotion with that. Now, this discussion or learning that all of Master Bulk's former Padawans died on Geonosis, it's food for thought, man. It makes you think that wow, that is a valid reason to question the Jedi Order, right? To question your allegiance. Now, Master Crook feels that the Clone Wars don't preserve life. So all these are valid reasons or sentiments as to why these Jedi don't want to be a part of the Jedi, why they're dissident Jedi, in other words. And these sentiments are what they convey to Mace Windu during their meeting, right? Another Jedi, Master Jazet, thinks that the Republic is corrupt and that the Jedi basically have no business serving corruption, serving a corrupt Republic, right? And other Jedi, Mira and Tarn, basically copy, or not, it is a copy because they say some of the exact things that Padme conveys in the movies as far as to the status of the Republic, right? And I think it's specifically speaking about that scene where Anakin responds to her, "You're sounding like a separatist." So basically they say, what if the Republic we're serving is no longer the what we thought it was, and we're becoming the very thing that we sought to fight against? If you remember that scene from Revenge of the Sith. I'm paraphrasing, okay? So it's not an exact recollection of the dialogue, right? Now, another thing is that slavery, illegal prisons, and spice mines all exist within the Republic. And this is something that they basically bring up. And again, more food for thought. More sentiments that are valid, right, from these dissident Jedi. Now, Master Bulk is ultimately attacked by Asajj Ventress, right? So after the meeting, everybody takes some time to meditate and to basically, take some time to themselves in order to see what decision they're going to make as far as possibly returning to the Jedi Order. Now, Master Bulk, again, is attacked by Asajj Ventress, and she kills Mira, right? Asajj Ventress is always being that ruthless bitch that she's known to be, right? Love Asajj Ventress. Great villain, right? Now, Asajj Ventress tries to pretend that she's with Mace in order to cause division among these negotiating Jedi. So, in other words, the other Jedi think that he's the one that killed Master Bulk and killed Mira. So they start to feel like, we got to get Mace, right? And this is going to lead to tragedy, unfortunately. Now, Mace, he knows what's going on. He could sense the presence of Asajj Ventress, and he decides to confront her himself. He decides to confront Asajj Ventress. Now, this other Jedi named Jedi Rod, he's super hot-headed, and he's very reckless, and he decides to go after Asajj Ventress. And in the process of going after Asajj Ventress, since he's filled with so much aggression and hate, he turns to the dark side, right? And of course, with some help from Asajj Ventress, right? He can't see what he's doing, and he turns to the dark side and kind of goes berserk, like Wolverine in the comics or something. Now, Mace Windu finds out that Sora Bulk, the leader of the dissident Jedi, is with Ventress. So there's a lot of it's just a mess here as far as who is in allegiance with who, right? Now, ultimately, Rod is killed by the Jedi. He got too entrenched in his dark side sentiments and was killed for being reckless. Now, it turns out that Sora, the one that is with Asajj Ventress, created this lightsaber fighting technique with Mace Windu called Vapad. I think I'm pronouncing it right. I may not be. I'm terrible sometimes with enunciating these Star Wars names and terms, but let's just call it the Vapad lightsaber wielding technique, which kind of walks that fine line between the light and dark side of the Force. So Sora created this with Windu, and he is kind of being tempted by the dark side here. And there's an epic battle between Mace and Sora, right? And it's interesting to see because here you have the two founders of this, I guess you want to say, controversial lightsaber technique, and they're going at it. And then right after this, Mace and Ventress go at it. So we got a lot of lightsaber action with Mace Windu fighting these two individuals. Now, ultimately, Ventress escapes, and the droids attack Mace and the Jedi. And during this attack, Mace Windu and the Jedi escape in haste. Now, Mace tells the Jedi to warn their comrades, right, of what's going on. And he doesn't force them to come back to the temple, right? He knows if he forces them, that's only going to make things worse. That's only going to give them motivation to go to the dark side or possibly join the Separatists, and he doesn't want to force them. He respects their choice. So Sora Bulk turned to the dark side, right? And it's very unfortunate, and it's something that Mace Windu has to come to terms with. And that's basically how this volume, The Defense of Kamino, ends. And again, this is outstanding. Outstanding. I highly recommend this series, The Clone Wars, presented by Dark Horse, or originally published by Dark Horse Comics. It is one of my favorites. Easily an A- here. I only, knock off a couple of points because of that little story involving the calamari, which could have easily been not in this. And, it's you could totally skip that, in other words. So, yes, A-. Highly recommended to any fan of the prequels or the Clone Wars. You will not regret reading this. Thank you for listening to this review and in-depth analysis of Clone Wars Volume 1, The Defense of Kamino. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and share. May the Force be with you. And last but not least, one love, people. Take care.